Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for participating in this forum. As a very proud member of the LGBT community, this project is very dear to my heart. And I'm thrilled to have you, this distinguished panel, with us. I would like to first acknowledge and say thank you to the TD Bank Group for sponsoring all of our digital events around this project. And before I hand it over to Tranna, I would like to start by acknowledging that Orchestre Classique de Montréal is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyong-Bihaga Nation is recognized as the custodian of the lands and waters on which we perform today. Tiohtià:ke, Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. We respect the connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the wonderfully diverse Montreal community. That being said, I hand it over to you, Tranna, and I wish you all wonderful discussions and have fun.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Taras. I'm Tranna. I'm so excited and truly honored to be the spokesperson for Orchestre Classique de Montréal's production of As One happening this November. I will, of course, remind you at the end, but for everyone who's interested in tuning in to the show in November, please check out orchestre.ca or the Orchestre Classique de Montréal Facebook page. I think I'd like to start with just why we're here, first of all, and doing this forum on gender identity today. There are several reasons. I think one of the most important reasons is to try to demystify some of the trans experience and what it means to be a trans person. I think we've all witnessed a sort of mainstream discussion around this subject really take center stage over the last few years, but it still seems to be something that is complex and not always super well understood. I think also to consider the fact that the people who will hopefully be coming to see the opera and get to experience this story might not really be all that familiar with the terminology and what it means to be a trans person in the world today. And I think this has also been a really great opportunity to engage the trans community and hopefully allow the opera to reach people that it might not have reached before. I know when I was first asked to be a spokesperson for this production, my experience of opera has been very limited, and I was so amazed and so like wonderfully surprised to discover As One and to know that there's an opera about some of the things many of us have been through. So again, it's truly an honor to be here, to be the spokesperson and to talk with all of you today. So of course, I would like to go around and have each of us start off by introducing ourselves. I can start. I'll describe myself in a little bit more detail. Again, my name is Tranna. I'm a comedian, singer, podcast host, producer, basically Barbara Streisand minus the money and the clone dogs. I live in Montreal. My pronouns are she, her. And so I'll invite each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Please take the time that you need to tell us who you are. We're not in any rush. So just start with your name, your pronouns, your profession, and what your involvement in the LGBTQ community is, whether on a personal level or through your work. Kimberly, I guess we'll start with you. We're so happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for this this discussion. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, my name is Kimberly Reed. My pronouns are she, hers. I am the co-librettist for As One, which for those of you who aren't big opera fans means that I wrote the words that get sung. And I'm also a filmmaker. There's a film component to As One. There's some projections, and I made the film that takes place in As One as well.
And Kimberly, actually, I was going to just give a brief description of As One, and I forgot, but since you co-wrote it and we're so lucky to have you with us, Would you mind explaining to the people watching what the story of As One is?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just tell you a little bit about it because I think it unfolds in music, which of course is what opera is all about. So I hope that you can come and experience the story as it's sung, which is the best way to experience it. There, you know, As One is the story of one trans person's journey. It's told from two different angles, sort of a before angle and an after angle, sort of a male angle, sort of a female angle. I'm hedging on those because I think that it's more important to focus on what's similar in between this before and after male and female sides than it is to kind of split things out into these two. I think of it more like a yin yang symbol. And so anyway, through 15 short scenes that basically comprise little anecdotes in this one person's life that sort of jumps from when they're very young to when they're very old. It just tells the story of, you know, one person's transition. It's not the story of every trans person ever. It's this one person's journey. There are some autobiographical elements because I was drawing on my own experience when my co-librettist, whose name is Mark Campbell, when we were creating the piece. But it's also, yeah, it's also very much fictionalized too. So a little bit of both.
I mean, I was lucky to see a filmed performance of it and I loved it so much. And I'm so excited for a Montreal audience to get to experience this. And I mean, since it will be digital, I mean, we, you know, hopefully people from all over will be able to access this musical, this opera, pardon me, that I think is so important and so unique. And thanks so much for being with us today. We're really honored and excited to have you here.
Likewise, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
So we'll continue with our introductions. Ida, would you like to go next?
There we go. Yes, the dreaded
I know.
My name is Ida Holmes, and I'm the artistic and executive director at the Centaur Theatre here in Montreal. And I've been invited by Taras and Orchestre Classique de Montréal to direct this production of As One, which I'm really honored to be able to have had this invitation. My pronouns are she, her. I'm not a member specifically of the LGBTQ community. However, having come up my previous life before I was a theater director, I was a ballet dancer. So my life was inspired from the earliest point by the LGBT community. And I have counted that as one of the greatest gifts that I've ever received, actually. I saw the opera through Taras, sent it to me to see, and I was so moved by the humanity that was embedded in the story and the way the story is told through music and words. That's the power of opera, is when words and music marry and become a new thing. And so it's a brilliant medium for this particular story because it's things coming together and becoming something really beautiful. So I was thrilled to have the chance to participate in the chance of bringing this to more people, because it's a really stunning piece of work. So thank you, Kimberly, for every aspect of it that you've contributed, and the film and all of the things. And I lived in San Francisco I was with the San Francisco Ballet in the beginning of my career. So all the images of the Bay Area are so like homecoming for me. just wonderful. So thank you.
I love that. Thank you so much, Ida. We're so happy to have you with us. Elise, would you like to go next? I don't know if you could hear me.
Okay.
Elise, would you like to go next?
Okay.
Okay, I can hear you now, yes.
Okay, sorry.
Oh,
So
it's all good.
Elise, I'm a transgender female, but more and more becoming like female. considering myself as a female. I'm a master brewer, and I live in a small, tiny community, which I was the first transgender here. So it has been quite a weird journey, but now things are getting better. My pronouns are she and her, and I did my coming out to myself at the age of 40, 6 years ago. So now I say that I'm 40 and 6 years old, and someday I'll be like 40 and 12 years old. So that I do have two lives. I consider myself as a lesbian. I got my girlfriend, which is Alexandra, and she also considers herself as a lesbian. I'm really proud to be part of that project because in my life, I'm apart from being a brewer, I'm volunteer for Montréal, which is a beautiful organism that try to demystify gender identity and sexual orientation. So I'm really proud to go into the schools and like talk about myself and just break down all the prejudice that people may have against gender identity, and just to be like more, just say that we are all normal. We have our own way of coping, not coping, but passing through that. But and everybody's story is different. Like I don't know, somebody else said that just prior to here, and I'm really glad to be here with you guys to normalize that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the work that you do alongside with Gris is such important work. I'm just curious before we move on with that work of, demystifying what it means to be queer or trans or any part of the LGBTQ community. What does that work sort of look like? Are you going into schools? Are you going into business places? How does it work exactly?
Yeah, Montréal is a research group for social intervention. So we do go. It's free, so we are all volunteer. It's 25 plus years old organism. There's more than 250 volunteers there, and we go to schools, to cégep, to university, to also to some private enterprise companies
Okay.
who wants to just who have to deal with those issues and want to learn how to deal with it easily. So we just go into those class and let people ask questions. So we want to hear their questions. We're ready to answer any question that may come out, and to just say it by our own story, our own words.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you with us today. And last but certainly not least, Lucia, would you like to introduce yourself next, please?
Sure. My name's Lucia Lucas. I am my pronouns are she her, and I am an opera singer in Germany, and I am married to my lovely wife. And yeah, I think that's everything.
I mean, I think you're underselling yourself a little bit. I mean, you're a world-renowned opera singer who has broken so many barriers. Do you sort of see yourself that way and are able to recognize sort of the amazing things that you've achieved for yourself and for the trans community as well?
I just try and be myself as authentically as possible, and if that helps somebody, then that's great. I try and make myself available for people, and my email address is out there and it's open. Anybody who's friendly can send me an email, and I'm always happy to talk with people. So the advocacy that I try and do is mostly on a one-on-one basis, unless I'm speaking to the press. But I try to just speak for myself. I think that as with Kimberly and as with as one, we each have our own story, and our stories are all different, and there are different ways where they overlap and intertwine. And I think that many people, whether they're trans or not, can watch as one and see scenes where they identify with a moment in time where they felt that same emotion. And so I just try and speak authentically to my own experiences, my own story, and try and be as well prepared and for my job and do my job as best that I can. And if it helps somebody, then wonderful.
That is really beautiful. I love that you've made yourself so accessible to people, who might benefit from your wisdom. And that's really beautiful. And we are truly so lucky and thrilled and honored to have you with us today. And so at this point, I'll invite you to introduce the first aria that you'll be singing for us today.
So the first aria is De Vieni alla finestra from Mozart's Don Giovanni.
Vieni alla finestra, oh mio tesoro, e vieni a consolare il pianto mio. Se neghi a me di dar qualche ristoro, davanti agli occhi tuoi morir voglio. Toccai la bocca dolce più che miele, purché il zucchero porti in mezzo il cuore. Non esse gioia mia come crudele, lasciati almeno vedermi, oh bell'amore.
Yay. Thank you so much, Lucia. That was so beautiful. And again, we're so lucky to have you performing with us and for us. What a true honor. Um, does
Thank you
anyone
so
want to
much.
share their thoughts on that performance? I thought it was so wonderful. I wish I could sing like that and have that. It must be such a channel of self-expression for you to be able to use your voice in that way.
It's a medium of self-expression, really. Um, yeah. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved it. And I'm sure everyone who just watched it did as well. Before we continue our forum and discussion, or not before, but as we continue, I've been asked just to sort of define some terms that are related to gender identity, just so that we don't take for granted that everyone watching here today or watching this later on knows what all of the terms surrounding gender identity means. Again, this is a very nuanced and multi-layered and often complex thing to talk about. So I'll just quickly sort of define a few terms just so we have a basis from which to jump off from. But I also want to say that it's hard to rigidly define gender identity and what it means because it's so unique to each of us. And like so many of you have said already in our discussion, that no two trans people have the same story. And I think sometimes when we try to define identity, it becomes sort of limiting. So I would just keep that in mind as I quickly read some of these definitions. So first of all, the definition of transgender. Transgender people have a gender identity or gender expression that differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. Some transgender people desire medical assistance to transition from one sex to another. Transgender, often shortened as trans, is also an umbrella term. In addition to including people whose gender identity is the opposite of their assigned sex, trans men and trans women, it may include people who are not exclusively masculine or feminine. Here are some of those terms. So I will now define non-binary or genderqueer, which is a spectrum of gender identities that are not exclusively masculine or feminine, identities that are outside the gender binary. Non-binary identities can fall under the transgender umbrella since many non-binary people identify with a gender that is different from their assigned sex. Another term for non-binary is NB, for the abbreviation NB, non-binary. And the umbrella term of non-binary also encompasses terms like bigender and pangender identities. Lastly, I'll also give a brief definition of two-spirit, which might be another gender identity that people have heard but maybe don't fully understand. So two-spirit, or occasionally referred to as two-spirited, is an umbrella term used by some Indigenous North Americans to describe Native people in their communities who fulfill a traditional third gender or other gender variant ceremonial and social role in their cultures. So again, these are very simple, quick definitions that hopefully give people watching a sort of context. But I would invite everyone watching us today to learn more about gender identity, because again, it really is a spectrum. And as you can see in these definitions, each of them sort of exist as umbrella terms, and there's so much nuance and there's so much specificity in each individual's experience. So again, I would invite everyone to sort of read more on gender identity, or come join us for As One on November 20th, which will also give you another perspective. Don't limit yourself to just one perspective when it comes to the discussion of gender identity. So from there, I'd like to open up the floor for each of us to sort of talk about or share the moment when we came to a realization of ourselves as trans people. And as I ask that to each of you, please know that you are welcome to share as much or as little as you want to share. This is such a personal experience and such a personal story. I don't want anyone to feel pressure to share anything they don't want to share. But I guess I'll start with my own sort of aha moment when it came to my own discovery of myself as trans. I do identify as a trans woman, although I think that there are also elements to my identity that are very much non-binary. I sort of tense up when it comes to sort of having to rigidly define my gender. And for me, the idea of being trans is so much related to this beautiful idea of non-conformity and not wanting to sort of, stick to the binary of male and female that we've all grown up in. And, for me, there was a long time in my life, for, I guess, most of my childhood and teen years and even early adult years, where, I was sort of trying to fit into the world as a gay cisgender man, and that just never felt right for me. And I grew up in the age of Will and Grace. And at that moment in time, especially when it comes to media representation, there weren't a whole lot of trans characters or trans representation in media. And so I think when I was growing up, I wasn't even all that familiar with the word or what it meant. And so I had no way of really seeing myself. The only things that I really encountered were stories of gay and lesbian cisgender people. So looking to those examples, I thought, well, if I have a boy body and I'm attracted to men, then that must mean that I'm gay. And again, that it never felt right for me. I remember, going to gay clubs back then and even trying to date as a cisgender gay man. And there was always this feeling in me that felt so out of place. And when I was a kid, I thought, you know, when I'm a grown up and I'm around other gay people, then I'll feel so accepted. And then when that moment came and I tried to enter this world of the gay community and I still didn't fit in, it was sort of alarming. And I was reading Chaz Bono's memoir, who's Cher's son, and and Chaz came out as a trans man many years ago. I want to say it like almost 10 years ago. And I was reading Chaz's memoir mostly because I wanted to hear stories about Cher. And as I was reading this book, and I heard Chaz describes sort of what I had been going through. So Chaz in the book describes, you know, thinking that there was a point where, you know, he was a female lesbian and how he tried to live so many of his years under that identity and it never felt right. And hearing the way that Chaz sort of lived that experience really opened up my eyes. And I was just like, oh my God, this is what I've been going through my whole life. Like, here I am thinking that I'm a gay male, but I'm not, and I never have been, and it's never been that. And in a way, it really brought me back to being a kid, even to being as young as like 3 years old, when I just knew it without words that I was female. And so Chaz's memoir was really the thing that brought me back to that inner knowledge that I think I always had, but that I just became so disconnected to as a kid and a teen when I didn't have any examples and I couldn't figure it out on my own. So that's sort of my story of how I came to really understand myself as a trans person. Who would like to go next? Anyone? Don't leave me hanging. Lucia, sure.
Yeah, so I knew when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and it took me, I don't know, maybe a decade or so, uh, to find the right words, but I always knew. So by the time I started college, I knew. I didn't know. I didn't know if I was going to have to transition. Um, I knew that that was right. I didn't. I don't know. There's always these moments about when is the right time to come out, when is the right time to transition. But I knew from like 5 or 6 years old, and spent my childhood learning masculine gestures and how to be masculine, and I don't know, just sort of gathered that in a toolbox, which I now use on stage when I primarily portray masculine characters on stage. But I always knew that these were mannerisms and tools that I was using to stay safe in the real world.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I can really relate a lot. Would anyone else like to share next? Or just let me know if you don't want to share that story, which is equally fine. No pressure at all. Just let me know.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Like Lucia, I didn't knew it. Like all I can remember is that I was feeling dysphoric about my gender. So maybe we can like explain what dysphoria is. So it's kind of a, I don't know. It's hard to say in English for me because I'm mainly French speaking. But you always feel that there's something wrong. You always feel that you better be on the other gender side. You always feel that I was some kind of jealous of the other girls, but not knowing why. I was, and like Lucia said, I had my toolbox, which I learned to be a man, and what was supposed to be to be doing, what I was supposed to be doing as a man. But I was like, it's so hard. And I do grew up in a family that was somewhat normal. And back in the 80s, it was kind of normal to be somewhat homophobic, or at least laugh at homosexuals. So I just grew up with that feeling that it was wrong. And I was not gay. I was heterosexual, but for me, being transgender was more than be just gay. So if gay is not good, what am I? So I just like kept shut, and I tried all my life to be as male as I can. I grew up a big beard. I was the bird that was making jokes and being the best jerk he can be. And dysphoria was killing me from the inside. Like I was holding it back there, but it was killing me. And again, I tried to wear skirts or kilts. So that thing just lessened the pain I had, because it was giving me somewhat of a feeling of what it could be to be a female. And then I started to wear more and more skirts, more and more kilts, and in the wintertime, and like all year long. In fact, it was my only way to cope with that. But it was still not enough. It was like a drug somewhat. Like I tried it, I liked it, it made me feel good. And the more I was getting old, the less joy I had in life. The only thing that made me feel good was thinking that I was a female, experiencing female things, and be like, this is what I am. So I went like all the way down, all the way close to suicidal thoughts. And then speaking to my father on New Year's Eve, he said, you don't come to see me. It's been 10 years since you came. You always say that you're tired. And I'm like, yeah, I'm tired. He said, do something, because you're gonna die. And my father was the only one who, I was afraid of him. I was afraid of him knowing that I may be trans. And he just gave me the key, just gave me the little push to say, okay, he's telling me to do something, I'm gonna do something. And from that moment, I just decided to, okay, that is gonna be me now, and I'm going to do it. And since then, I'm just so much more happy and so much more enjoying life like a normal person.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Elise. I think it's so important. I think there's so much power in us sharing these stories and being able to, not in any sort of preachy way, but just to have our stories be accessible, because I think, at least just among the stories that we've heard so far, there's sort of this common thread of, not always necessarily having the words or the example or the guidance of how to get from where you are to where you want and need to be. And I do think that things are changing in that sense, in a positive way, but change is always very slow, obviously. Kimberly, did you want to share some of your story, or maybe how it relates to As One and the creative process behind that?
Yeah, sure. A lot of similarities. I think that one of the things that I don't know how good I am about talking about stuff like this. Because I tend to just put these stories into form, other storytelling forms. I mentioned I'm a filmmaker. The whole way that As One started is the composer Laura Kaminsky saw a documentary that I made. It's autobiographical about my process of coming out. It's called Prodigal Sons, that came out about 10 years ago. Actually, exactly, it's the 10th anniversary. And that was, I think, my way of, in a lot of ways, coming to terms with, like, I transitioned long before that, but it was the first time I was going back to my hometown in Montana, this relatively small town. And just kind of coming out to all the people I went to high school with. A lot of the stories that Lucia has talked about, that Elise talked about, resonate with me too. And there's stories I hear all of the time about trans people as feeling like you're given this gender presentation that you're these rules that you're supposed to follow that just don't resonate. They don't feel natural, but that sometimes as trans people we tend to figure out how to play by those rules and maybe even overcompensate. I spent a fair amount of time overcompensating for all of that, and even sort of feeling like if I could kind of make my transness go away, if I could just be better at all that other stuff that you're supposed to be doing, in big, huge air quotes. So yeah, all of that sounds really familiar, and it's what, you know, like there's one of the scenes in As One is called Perfect Boy, which is really just about that, about the pressure to conform to gender norms and the frustration that happens when you experience that dysphoria, when you feel like you're playing against these rules. And that, you know, explains a lot about my transness. It sounds like that's a common theme with some of the other stories we've heard here today. But I think it's also something that I want our cis audiences, and by cis, I just mean non-trans, that I want cis folks to think about too, because all of us are inculcated with these gender codes, these rules that we're supposed to obey. And I don't know about y'all, but some of the best work I've done on myself, just internally, has to do with examining those codes, those behaviors that are, you know, inculcated in us, that we're pressured to obey. And a process of dismantling that is, at least for me, has been very illuminating to describe who I really am once you kind of pull away all those different layers of cultural impositions, and especially when it comes to gender. That's a huge impact, and I think it's a very confusing one. So weeding that out is something I think that we can all do, whether we're trans or not.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kimberly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's something that I also feel so strongly about, is sort of examining this code of gender performance that we've all inherited, cis or trans, of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and how so much of that seems so arbitrary, and also just fundamentally seems like this way of, in particular, keeping women and femme people sort of, you know, tied down or sort of limited in a way, you know, especially when I think about the idea of appearance and everything that so many trans women and cis women have to go to in terms of reaching these very suffocating and often unattainable standards of beauty that are really so limiting. And Ida, I know that the original bigger question doesn't really apply to you since you're not trans, but since Kimberly, you know, brought this up, I'm curious about how you've navigated that as a cis woman, and maybe some of the pressures that you feel in terms of what society tells us a woman is meant to be.
It's really incredibly powerful to hear you all talk about it, because even though I have always identified as a woman, in the grander gender notion, the limits of that idea have always, I've always questioned and struggled with what that what that definition actually is, one of the very first theater pieces I made was about the idea of how do you learn to be a woman? Who teaches you that? Where do you get that from exactly? And I think I feel so lucky to live now in this moment where it's possible for me to be an artistic director, for example, of a theater company. I'm the first one at Centaur in the 50-year history of the organization. So it is an interesting moment where there's empowerment for women, all women. However, it is an interesting, I came from ballet, which was an incredibly genderized world, tutus and jockstraps, so basically. But I was lucky enough to work with a ballet company in Europe that was a very, very avant-garde company called the Frankfurt Ballet with William Forsythe. And in that company, we were a group of dancers that were given the opportunity to be everything we could be as people. And it was in that moment where I really understood that there was so much potential variety to human experience and so much capacity for joy in a variety of embodiments. And so I saw that as a real gift to understanding how much is possible in the world if you take away the restrictions and the narrowness of definitions of everything. So I found in what's so brilliant about the opera, I think, is how you feel your connection to it as a human being rather than as a woman or as a man. You follow the story through growing up as a person, and what's clear to me in all of your stories is that you grew up through this set of limits and challenges and restrictions, and have it's inspiring because it's the hero's journey in the best sense, where you find your way to your own truth, which is something that we all, that's the most human experience there is.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ida. It's so powerful and so beautifully said. And I mean, it's such that idea, Kimberly, that you were referring to, of this sort of attempt or this work that we can all hopefully do together to sort of dismantle these rigid sort of codes and this way of being. The task just feels so enormous because the roots run so deep in all of this. And it's also why on a personal level, I always have a hard time understanding, cis women who might be sort of transphobic, because we share so much in this, inherited code of what it means to be a woman. Did anyone have anything else they'd like to add to this discussion before we move on?
I would just say that everybody has a gender, and sometimes it's only trans folk or women or people who are non-binary who kind of bump up against what that actually means and how valuable it is to look at those codes that you've been inculcated with. But we all have a gender, and regardless of how butch or femme or how polarized you are or non-polarized you are, because sometimes I think trans people are maybe as guilty as anyone when it comes to keeping that gender binary kind of locked in place. I mean, I think all of us can challenge ourselves to find a continuum of gender and then find where we feel comfortable on that, which doesn't have to be even a specific point on that continuum, right? I mean, some of us are going to have wider ranges and some of us are going to be very comfortable in one kind of very distinct point.
I think that's so well said. And I think that it's something about the trans experience that we don't hear too much about. Everything you just said is so important and illuminating. And I think sometimes you know, especially when we think about the pervasiveness of media and how much information we gather from the shows that we watch and the movies that we watch, I think sometimes we miss out on some of that nuance and that spectrum that you're talking about, Kimberly, that I think is so important. So I really appreciate you sharing all of that so thoughtfully and in a way that I think can be really meaningful for the people watching.
Thanks. And to kind of bring it back to the piece, I mean, one of my favorite, to the piece being as one, one of the things I'm proud of, the fact that Mark and I could pull it off and that Laura weaves it together so beautifully with the music, is that you know, the piece is all about internal conflict, and normally drama is all about, you know, conflicts with the external world, and so in writing this piece that was about this internal conflict, the resolution, and you'll have to go see how we pull it off and see if you agree that we pull it off. But I love seeing Ida nodding a little bit because you know where I'm going. But it's like the whole resolution of this conflict happens internally, and it happens without any sort of reaction with the outside world. It's just this realization for our character, who's named Hannah, that she doesn't have to try to be this way for that person or this way for that person, that she reaches this moment of inner peace, and that's the resolution, and that inner peace is just being comfortable with her gender. So anyway, that's this topic that we're discussing here is one that is really at the root of As One.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it just really adds to my excitement for people to get to discover this really incredible piece. And on that note, speaking of incredible, we are so lucky to have a second performance from Lucia. So Lucia, would you like to sort of introduce this next piece that you're going to sing for us?
Sure. The second piece is Pietà, Rispetto, Amore from Verdi's Macbetto.
Perfidi all'anglo contro me unite, le potenze presagiam protetago, esse poi
Yay. Thank you so much for that beautiful performance, Lucia. Thank you for treating us to 2 performances. We're so lucky to have that, and again to have you with us today. Um, so before we wrap up, I just want to know if any of you have anything that you'd like to add to today's discussion. I feel like this time just flew by. So I just want to make sure that if there was something that you wanted to add, or something that you didn't get the chance to say, please do so now.
Maybe I can follow up with what Kimberly said regarding that we all have a gender. Gender is a kind of a weird thing because you don't even know if it exists if you don't have any problem with it. You just have one, but you don't know it exists. So, and I'm really proud to be part of that that opera. No, I'm not proud. I'm not into the opera, but I'm proud to be here with you guys because breaking those barriers just help everybody else. Because being transgender is a big thing, big statement to say, oh, I did a transition, or I know somebody who did a transition, but everybody has a gender, and everybody has a level of comfort with it. And by lessening the gender difference, the gender barriers, everybody just feels get help with that. Everybody just have an easier life, and it's not because you don't make a transition that you feel perfect with your gender. So it's really fresh, and we need to talk about that because men and women are pretty closer than we think they are.
I couldn't agree more personally. I mean, I always sort of joke that, because I'm a comedian, but that if everyone really thought about it, everyone really thought about their gender, maybe everyone would be trans to some degree, just because it really is that spectrum of who really, and as you were saying, Elise, this idea of feeling comfort or full comfort within your gender all the time. I don't know if that, I think, like you said, in sort of lessening these barriers, that allows for more freedom and more comfort, and for more of us to feel at least a kind of freedom moving in the world, so I personally really do wish for those barriers to be lessened and for the pressure to be taken off a little bit. Did anyone else have anything they'd like to add? Yeah, Lucia.
I'd just like to add, we started a little bit of a discussion earlier about dysphoria, and I sing baritone, and I sing a lot of men on stage, and I would encourage people to think about what you do as a profession, or the activities that you enjoy, to not let those define you, or not let something that you enjoy doing not give that up just because you think that it's too masculine or too feminine for yourself. You can enjoy those things regardless of your identity. And yeah, I do believe that there's a sort of masculine feminine energy in everyone, and and if you want, if you feel that a transition of some sort is important for you, then that's wonderful. And if not, you are just as valid as anybody else. I would really encourage people to consider that sometimes there are different limits for why somebody can or cannot transition to whatever extent they want. And sometimes that's not up to them. Sometimes it has to do with limitations of their own medical histories. And I would never want to put any sort of limit on somebody's identity. And that's something that I don't know, I would like to emphasize that that who you are inside is legitimate, no matter how much or how little action you take on that. Who you are is who you are.
And a lot of times transition and the ability to transition presumes a lot of entitlement and a lot of privilege, and not everybody ends up in that position. It has a lot to do with, you know, skin color and the racism that really permeates our society too. So yeah, there's a lot of things we need to consider when, you know, whether or not somebody is transitioning. I'm on the board of an organization called GLISTEN, which is all about making K through 12 schools safe for kids. And you know, it's a very different thing to transition with supportive parents in some big city on the coast than it is to transition in the middle of the country, either Canada, middle of the country in North America. And if you find yourself without supportive parents or supportive teachers or that support network around you, it can just be a very dangerous thing. So we all have to keep all those considerations in mind. Think about whether or not somebody's transitioned or not. I love what you said, Lucia. That's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I think, Lucia, it's something that doesn't really get said enough. You know, I think within the trans community, even just the other day, I have a trans friend who was on Instagram and sort of sharing this video and, you know, talking about this very personal decision to no longer be on hormones and the pressure that he was feeling because he was starting to think that, well, if I, you know, stop this process, then I'm not really trans anymore. And all these pressures that I think that exist within the trans community, and this fixation on medical transition and hormones and people feeling like not having access to those things make them less, or sometimes it's a question of just that not being right for them. But to come back to your point of who we each are as we are is enough, I think is profoundly important. So thank you. And Ida, did you have something you'd like to share as well?
I just wanted to say, just to bring it back to the opera, that is the beauty of the way the opera is structured. And as Kimberly mentioned, it takes the character to that place of self-identifying inside and finding truth within herself. And that is inspiring to everybody, no matter what your journey through life has brought you to. So that, I think, is extremely powerful. So thank you for that.
I couldn't agree more. I just want to say that it's been truly such a joy to speak and digitally meet each of you today. I've genuinely learned so much in talking with each of you, and I want to thank you so profoundly for your time and your generosity and your eloquence and for sharing. So Elise, Lucia, Kimberly, Ida, thank you all so much. I truly believe that the people watching today have gotten something out of this panel. I know that I definitely have. I'd like to remind everyone that if you'd like to see the musical, the opera, I don't know, I'm from the Broadway world, so I keep saying musical and I'm so sorry. But for those of you who would love to join us for the opera, and I really, really encourage you to do so, because this is such a unique and powerful and important story, and we're so lucky to have access to it in this form and in this way. So all of the information that you need to get tickets can be found on the website orchestre.ca or on the Facebook page. Thank you each all again. Thank you to the Orchestre Classique de Montréal for not only producing and bringing this opera to us, but for giving us the opportunity to gather today and have this discussion. I'm so grateful, and I wish you all a happy and safe day. Please take care of yourselves, and we'll see you at the opera.
Yay.